West Coast SEAL teams 1, 3, 5, and 7 are literally stationed a few short miles from the Tijuana border, about a 5-minute helicopter ride if you feel me. In fact, for the last decade, some of my buddies that live around Imperial Beach have literally seen tracers from cartel firefights in the Tijuana foothills at night. But that's all about to be a thing of the past. So, exactly what happens as soon as the cartel is declared a terrorist organization? Well, first, the cartel will be registered as a terrorist organization in the Federal Register. This will officially set off a series of actions that will ultimately lead to the ruin of what we know today as the cartel. Secondly, all assets and monies, even remotely associated with the cartels, such as holding banks, will be blocked by the U.S. government. Third, the cartel will no longer be feared and glamorized because they will be internationally stigmatized and isolated, meaning others who have secretly or openly associated themselves with the big bad cartels like Mexico's own government will immediately stop private communication and transactions in fear of being labeled a terrorist themselves. Fourth, immense public awareness will be so heightened that fear and chaos will begin to disseminate throughout the cartel ranks, causing dissension and deserters. But that ain't nothing compared to what's going to follow. The cartel is going to be placed on the terrorist exclusion list, TEL, meaning the U.S. government will begin a mass deportation of all aliens.
So we are watching the Mighty Warrior 24 and his commentary about labeling Mexican drug cartels as terrorist organizations. I agree with most of the things that he's saying, that most people don't understand putting that label. It's more of a, not just a military tool. Some of the things that they'll be able to use will be able to target every financial institution or anyone that they think or believe that could have any type of business dealings with drug cartels, and that it's going to send people scrambling and people fearing that they might be caught up in that, because once these organizations are labeled as terrorist organizations or designated as terrorist organizations, it's not just military action. It's also that the laws that are there to punish terrorist organizations are gonna apply to them, and they have a lot more authority to circumvent some of even the laws that many, Americans or even nationals have around the world. So that will inflict a lot of fear in, even in many people, and it probably will inflict fear on the ones that are already in a situation where they can't run or they can't change their mind, or they just ignorant to understand what this means. But once the government starts taking the first steps, like with sanctions, and start applying some of these tools that Mr. Mighty Warrior here is speaking about, I do believe that it's gonna make a lot of people desert or think twice about even being involved in this type of criminal activity. I don't know if this is going to be good for public relations with Mexico. I don't think that no one's considering what's going to happen there. It's easy to assume that for the United States that some of the issues are going to go away, but that is not the case. I think that ramifications are going to come from the government doing this. It's going to really fall back on basically everyday Americans and Mexican citizens that are going to be basically against this. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be more of a bigger issue. I'm not even sure it could happen. I'm not against it. I'm not for it. I just think that this is not the solution. I think that what many fail to realize is that when the government for the last 50 years has labeled drug trafficking as like this war on drugs, it is not a war. There's no war, and the government continues to frame this as a war. And the first thing people think that it's a war, and there's a beginning and an end, and military action is gonna solve the problems. And to me, it's just again people not understanding that drug trafficking and Mexican drug cartels, it's a business. And if you're basically thinking that labeling these terrorist organizations is going to solve the issue at hand in the United States, to me, that's not going to happen. The issue is that we have a high demand for drugs and drug use. And today we might see, Mexican drug cartels who are considered to be, the enemy right now, and basically who take the blame for a lot of the stuff that's going on in the United States, including overdose deaths and some of the violence. But I will say that what started this epidemic in the first place was the pharmaceutical companies. They probably haven't as many deaths as Mexican drug cartels have in the killing of innocent people by the use of their drugs. The United States government basically sanctioned them, right? They gave them a fine and gave them a nice deal, and they were able to continue with their business. And I don't think there's a difference. I think that this has to be taken as an approach of differently than what the United States been doing for so many years. If it's not the Mexican drug cartels who have a ski mask and a utility vest with an AK, it's going to be, someone with a suit and a tie who is going to take their position. Do I believe that it could make Mexico safer? Sure, absolutely. But I don't think that we're talking about this because we want Mexico to be safer. We're talking about this because we're putting the blame on the United States demand for drugs on another country. Do I think that it's great for, the Mexican people that they don't have to live with this type of cartel fighting and all this violence that's caused by the demand on drugs? I think it's great. But do I think that this is gonna, stop the appetite and the demand for whatever the Mexico can't supply, another country will? So just look for maybe the Canadians being your next big drug traffickers. Of course, they're going to be coming a different way and probably come in suits or who knows how, but the drugs will keep coming as long as there's the demand and a consumer to buy them.
And finally, what we've all been waiting for so many years, the West Coast SEAL teams and many other special operations units will conduct mass, violent, direct action missions on every cartel member until being a cartel member will be a death sentence and no longer profitable. This will include, but not be limited to, large scale Reaper drone attacks and JDAM bombs deep into what was known as cartel strongholds. The only sad thing about all of this, when this plan is successfully executed, will be when we see again how inadequate all other administrations have been and how many lives could have been saved from fentanyl overdoses and human trafficking.
I'm gonna suspect that Mighty Warrior is in the military and he's been trained as a military guy. And that's what he knows is bombs and violence and violence with violence. And I will say that is not your solution. And the only thing I want to kind of point out is that I do think there's a stigma between Mexico and Mexicans and drug cartels because we didn't take the same approach with pharmaceuticals when they were killing Americans all over the United States and created this problem in the first place. I think that this is coming from a place of his knowledge and his experience and what he's been trained for is military action. And this is why I believe that there needs to be people who actually are expert in drug trafficking, like someone like me to be able to explain that I don't see how there's violence being infected in the United States between Mexican drug cartels. I see that there's a lot of violence in Mexico. And I don't see the violence being happening in the United States. Now, you might hear about it here and there, but I don't believe that Mexican drug cartels are committing acts of violence in the United States purposely or that's their agenda. I did see that there's a decline in fentanyl overdoses. I do believe that that's because the Mexican drug cartels are basically, now they're having more experience on some of the drugs that they're actually manufacturing, which basically kind of good is a good example of the business that we're speaking about is that the business changes, with the consumer, with the drug that the consumer is actually demanding. And it takes a while for drug trafficking organizations to get it right. Now, do I believe that there has to be a hard stance on drug cartels? Absolutely. Do I believe that this is going to be the only solution? No, I don't think that this is going to solve the issue. And I think that it's great for this administration to take a stance and do something that maybe other administrations haven't. But it's also is to look at it from a bigger picture and understanding how drug trafficking actually works, why we have drug cartels in the first place, and understand what are going to be the ramifications between the United States taking this type of approach with one of its biggest allies, of Mexico. Because I think there's other ways to put pressure on more Mexican officials to put a stop on, on these drug cartels. But I also believe that the United States hasn't exhausted all their options in combating drug cartels here in the United States. So it's my belief that the United States could do a lot more in the United States before they even have to take the approach as drastic as dropping bombs in our neighbors to the south and our allies to fix some of our problems. This is Mighty Warrior 24. This is my reaction to some of his comments. And, I believe he's part of, our military. So thank him for his service. And obviously, he's been well trained. He's very well educated on what it is to label a criminal organization as a terrorist organization. And I will say that there is a big difference between a terrorist organization and a drug trafficking organization. Those two are very different. So to summarize it, thank you to Mighty Warrior 24 for your service, for your expertise on designating groups into terrorist organizations. However, this is my views, my expertise, and there's a big difference between a terrorist organization and a drug cartel. And for this instance, we'll speak about Mexican drug cartel. Terrorist organizations are groups that use violence, intimidation, or fear to pursue political, religious objectives. Their primary aim is not financial gain. Drug cartels, however, are profit driven businesses. While they may use terror as a tactic, their primary motivation is financial gain. So there's a big difference between these two organizations. And I think that it's going to take a lot more outside thinking to actually solve some of the issues that the United States is having with the demand on drugs. I think that focusing on Mexican drug cartels and using military force is not going to solve the issues that we are facing in this country.